Now, I don't know what it is about Kol Nidre, but every time I write a sermon or have most of a sermon written, or in some cases a full sermon written and edited, I'm never happy with it. And inevitably, I find myself either doing something that I'm not going to do tonight, which is deliver something completely off the cuff, or writing a second sermon. And tonight is the latter, as what I wrote, to give you a little peek behind the curtain, what I initially wrote was what I thought I wanted to say, but I think tonight is what my heart really wants to speak in conversation with us. There is a tradition in Judaism of keeping two statements written in one's pockets. On one piece of paper, it says, "For me the world was created." On the other, it says, "I am but dust and ashes." According to the Talmud, we are supposed to take time to reflect every day on the incredible divine potential implanted within each and every one of us. And that is up to us to bring that divine potential to life. At the same time, we are also to remind ourselves that we are mortal, that time is finite. But I think these two papers are more than that. It is also to remind us of how mortality is a gift, and not of the preciousness of not only our lives, but also of the lives of those around us as well. And we keep these two statements in our pockets to remind us of how we as Jews are always living in tension. For example, when we pray, we have the keva, the set prayers we recite each time we gather. Tonight, we heard the haunting melody of Kol Nidre, but it is only haunting if we let it touch our souls. This is because prayers are just words, unless we bring kavanah. The intention, the passion, the heart's desires to those words. Our worship service is designed to live within the tension of the fixed versus the intention to help us navigate through the ebbs and flows of the prayer experience. So too it is with our inherited interpretive tradition that has been sustaining the Jewish people for 2,000 years since the rise of Rabbinic Judaism. There are the fixed rules, halakha, that help guide our observances and our practices. But there's also the intent behind those rules. For example, kashrut at its core is about what we consume. But at its heart, it's not about only what we eat, but being grateful for the food we have and the company to which we enjoy it with. It is about elevating the very act of eating to a holy act. And to focus on one can cause us to lose sight of the other. It is not just about the food, but also the ethics of the food and finding hakarat hatov, the gratitude for having it as well. But I did not come here tonight to merely talk about the tensions of keva and kavanah, or halakha versus intent. Rather, I wanted to speak about a tension many of us are struggling with. Namely, what does it mean to be Jewish here in the United States? And how that tension is having a greater and greater impact on our lives, and how it is also impacting our community. To start, Jews have been here since the time of Columbus. Though some have speculated that Columbus came from Jewish origins, there is no definitive proof to this claim. However, given his initial voyage took place in 1492, the same year Jews were expelled from Spain, it should come as no surprise that some with him were either Jewish or were very recent conversos who sought to flee Spain. As a recent article states, among the 90 crewmen of Spaniards and Moors were also a few people of Jewish origin. They included two experienced sailors, Rodrigo de Triana and Alfonso de la Calle, a physician, Mastre Bernal, a surgeon by the name of Marco, and Queen Isabel's personal inspector, Rodrigo Sanchez de Segovia, perhaps the most high-profile Jew on board, who had recently converted to Christianity by force, was Luis de Torres, an interpreter for the governor of Murcia. As a result of his knowledge of Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, and other ancient languages, Columbus thought his linguistic skills would be useful in communicating with the locals. Ever since 1492, Jews have been a part of the Americas. The most of them came here as individuals and did not establish communities. The first known colony was in 1654, when a group of Jews fleeing the Inquisition arrived in New Amsterdam from Recife, Brazil. Despite protests from the colony's Director General, Peter Stuyvesant, these refugees were allowed to remain. It probably didn't hurt that some of the largest investors in the Dutch West India Company were Jewish. These 23 refugees were allowed to remain as long as they did not become a burden to the colony. And we have been here ever since. The earliest communities were mostly Sephardic. They established synagogues in places like New York, Savannah, Newport, Charleston, and Philadelphia. But there were always tensions. There were always conditions. There were occasional questions of loyalty, and Jews were often suspect in this fledgling part of the world, often a vestige from Europe. Nonetheless, we found opportunities to thrive and participate in this great American experiment. For example, we have fought in every war this nation has faced. We fought on both sides of the Revolutionary War. We fought each other in the Civil War. And yes, there were Jewish slave owners. But, and I must emphasize this point, Jews did not create, nor were we responsible for the slave trade. Sadly, a libelous claim that persists to this very day. To demonstrate how we've been accepted here, we often refer to George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, which he wrote in 1791, stating in part, "It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed at the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily the government of the United States, which gives bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support." He goes on, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." This letter is all the more remarkable, especially if you think about how we were treated throughout the history of our time in Europe. But despite all of our successes, despite all of our integration into American society, we have always been in tension between being fully Jewish and fully American. The largest group of Jews, including most of us, can trace our ancestry to our parents, our grandparents, or our great-grandparents fleeing Europe between the 1880s and the 1920s. They fled persecution, they fled pogroms, they fled for a better life. Sadly, we know what happened to those who remained. But this nation, which prides itself on welcoming immigrants with open arms, was very nervous about the so-called unwashed, uneducated masses, and facing an onslaught of undesirables, closed its doors with the Immigration Act of 1924. Yes, the law was mostly targeting Jews. In many cities, there were red lines where Jews could live. Baltimore, where I served as a rabbi for 6 years, is still grappling with its anti-Jewish and anti-black housing laws. There were quotas in colleges and professions. This is in part why we created Hollywood and the comic book, the musical comedy, and were heavily involved in the developments with jazz, not because we were such a creative people, but because those were the opportunities afforded to us. We created our own country clubs and built our own hospitals to train our own doctors, and we even established some of our own universities to educate our young. Nonetheless, there was an expectation both amongst ourselves and by the larger community that ultimately we would assimilate into American culture. There is a saying that the largest collection of tefillin can be found in the East River, as Jews cast aside the trappings of Judaism as soon as they arrived on these shores. And we've been told over and over again to be Jewish in the synagogue, but not to be too Jewish when it comes to the outside world. We can even see it today in shows like Seinfeld. Clearly, all the main characters, except perhaps Kramer, are clearly Jewish. George, in particular, was a stereotypical New York Jew, but in an effort to make the show have a broader appeal, they made him Italian. According to historian Jeffrey Chandler, the masking of Jews on television has created crypto-Jews, characters who, while nominally identified as having some other ethnicity or religion, are nonetheless regarded by some viewers and even some creators as Jews in disguise. In Chandler's view, such crypto-Jews are a sign of the ethnic relativism that marks much of contemporary American culture. Be Jewish, but not too Jewish. Despite this tension, we managed to become the most successful diaspora community in history. For many, the United States became our new Zion, our new Zion. It was common in many Reform congregations to hear rabbis preach against immigration to British Palestine because we did not need a return of the state of Israel, as we have our new home. But for some, this message was too much, as they had dreams of building and returning to Israel. This tension actually split a handful of congregations across the country, including most famously Beth Israel in Houston, which saw a breakoff of 200 families to form Temple Emmanuel. As Rabbi David Lyon wrote about his community, it was a tension, a rift that tore apart not only a community, but also families that took decades to heal. And yes, we feel a similar tension in our own community today. A tension we are struggling with over how it means to continue to be in relationship, even if it feels like the world is trying to tear us apart. And this is the tension we live in today, which has come to the forefront even more so since the events of October 7th. And that is in part because we as Jews have always been suspect throughout our wanderings. I was reminded of this as I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts recently, Torah Smash. They argued the world seems to always want to have a supervillain, a role Jews have been cast into for generations. As Dr. Deborah Lipstadt has so eloquently stated, anti-Semitism is the world's oldest conspiracy theory. If you need us to be guilty of deicide, so be it. We killed God. We killed children to use our blood to make matzah. Never mind that murder is a violation of the Ten Commandments, and halakha prohibits the consumption of blood. We are communists. We are globalists. We control the media. We control the weather. Yes, we created a hurricane right before Yom Kippur, hitting Florida, where a large portion of Jews live. We control world events. We are all powerful, yet we are also lazy and incompetent. We are white genocidal colonists, and yet we are non-white disruptors and threats to the establishment. There is no consistency. We are merely cast as the villain over and over again for whatever role the world and the hate mongers need us to be. But this is not about anti-Semitism. This is about us. The problem is, we have started to let some of these hate-filled stereotypes and accusations enter into our own conversations with and about each other. To be in tension means we must not let others define who we are, even as we live in the tension of what it means to be Jewish, to be American, to be human, and to be in community. To live in this tension also means being Jewish is all joy and no fun. We have competing desires, competing values, competing hopes, competing dreams, and competing fears. Some of us want to live fully in our new Zion, our home here in America. Others embrace the tikvah, the hope that Israel represents for us now and for the future. Some of us live in between the two, and some of us are just trying to make it from one day to the next. But what we cannot do, we cannot let these tensions tear us apart or to tear apart our community. And we cannot let them diminish our ability to live meaningful, full Jewish lives no matter where we find ourselves. This is because the world we live in continually tells us over and over again, our place as Jews, where we belong and where we don't belong. And I'll be honest, I've had enough of it. Being Jewish does not mean you have to narrowly define things for yourself. When it is done right, it is done about creativity. It is about exploration. It is about questioning. And most importantly, it is about curiosity. We get to define it for ourselves, and we should never cede that power to anyone else. We are already living with enough pain and enough hurt to keep handing that power over to others. So where do we go from here? In the words of Rachel Goldberg-Polin, mother of the murdered hostage Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, was asked in an interview about how she can possibly move forward after her son was killed. She replied, "There are people who walked out of Auschwitz and went on to have a good life. They never forgot their parents and their siblings and their spouses and their children who they lost there. But they went out and they decided, and it took tremendous effort, and they had good lives. And there are people who walked out of Auschwitz and never left Auschwitz," she added. We're in mourning, we're suffering, but we're making a choice personally that we are going to live life. We need to do it for ourselves, we need to do it for our daughters, and we need to do it because Hirsch would want us. So we will live life. As we gather this evening asking to be sealed into the book of life, invoking of the words of Kol Nidre, all vows, we stood as one community asking to be forgiven for the sins that we will commit this coming year, not for the sins we committed this past year. It is a curious notion, which is why many Jewish theologians and communal leaders have struggled with Kol Nidre over the generations. But the more I reflect on it, the more I embrace it, because it reminds us of how we are in tension with the past, with the present, and with the future. It is up to each of us, to find the best path forward. I do not stand here today to tell you the correct path, because each of us must find our own way. What I am here to tell you is that Temple Israel, your Temple Israel, can be a home base for your Jewish journeys. Cantor Alexander, Rabbi Barrington, and I are but caretakers in your over 150-year-old congregational family and community. There were those who came before us, and God willing, there will be those who follow us. Some were giants, and some were but wayfarers in this long, illustrious history. But we are ready to stand beside you as we grapple with all of these tensions. We are all feeling the strain. We are all feeling the discomfort. We are all feeling a little lost and a little lonely. We are all grieving over through the tremendous losses of life, and we are struggling with what it means to live authentic Jewish lives that embody our core values. Let's be honest, living authentic, meaningful Jewish lives is hard. To be Jewish means living in two worlds, the worlds between tradition and modernity, to live between keva and kavanah, to live between observance and authenticity, to live between being American and being Jewish, to live between at least two understandings of Tzion, and to live in the tension between joy and sorrow. Recognizing all of this, to borrow from Rachel Goldberg Poland, now is the time to keep living. L'chaim, to life. This does not mean we abandon the hurts of the past or ignore the pains of the present. It means we continue to pray for an end to the violence and a return of the remaining 100+ hostages, including 7 Americans. It does not mean we inure ourselves against the tragedies that continue to befall our world. Even as we celebrate our joys, we will continue to find pathways to comfort each other in our sorrows. Even as we celebrate our heritage, we will continue to shout out about our frustrations, our hurts, and our disappointments with and through our complicated tradition. But there is also a greater need as well. To this end, we need to keep searching for, exploring, and ultimately embracing the pathways that keep leading meaningful, authentic Jewish lives, no matter where we find ourselves on this journey. For it is by navigating all of these tensions, we may very well find the pathway home. For as our pockets remind us, for me the world was created, and I am but dust and ashes. Shana Tova.